What is good, NIO family? It's Rey-Jay back with another video. And in this one, I want to break down what's happening with NIO, Tesla, SPY, and the overall markets. I'm going to break down NIO's earnings as we saw some very, very good pieces of news that came out. Some things weren't that great, but for the most part, I think NIO did well. I'm going to break down what I see for the share price moving forward. But just know that I am not a financial planner, so make sure you take nothing I say as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out my Moomoo link. If you deposit $100, you're guaranteed 5 free stocks. If you deposit $1,000, you're guaranteed 15 in total, not to mention an 8.1% APY on invested cash. The offer ends very soon in just about 10 days. Anyways, as far as NIO goes, we saw this thing dip a bit after we got earnings. Earnings did have some losses that were wider than expected. That's why the share price came down initially. But as time went on, we did see buyers come back and they managed to close NIO somewhat in the green. So NIO was flat despite earnings coming out. And I would say earnings had more good than bad if you actually look at the details. We do want to see improvements in their margins and we want to see their losses get a lot more narrow. That's what we're hoping for, at least for the future. Besides that, I would say pretty much everything else was more good than bad. So let's talk about their earnings. I'll break down more data involving Nvidia and the others. So NIO put on their Twitter page that they saw their total revenues at about the $2.6 billion USD mark. That is once again not too bad with a 7% increase from the second quarter. Now, when it comes to the way things are moving, there was some things that weren't too good. When it comes to the way things are looking, they did take a small dive because some things were a little bit disappointing, despite the fact that their outlook was not too bad. So the good and bad news is going to be like in this article. The first thing worth mentioning is the fact that they secured a top position in their BEV market for China, pricing their vehicles over $42,000, and they also hold more than 40% market share in the first 3 quarters of this year, which is not bad whatsoever. That was a good piece of news. Now, starting next year, they have three brands poised to like embark a new product cycle, and they're going to be once again continuing to grow in different areas because of that. Now, the share price did sink a bit because of some different factors out there. But when it comes to the main factor, one of the things that's worth mentioning is that the net losses were at about $775.2 million USD. That is below what we were expecting, right? That is not what we're basically looking for. The numbers are not too good. Sorry, that's above expectations. So they lost even more money than what we expect. It's not the best of news. And then on top of that, their adjusted per loss is about $2.14. That's technically wider than what the consensus was. So they lost more money than expected. Revenue is also at about 2.66 billion. That is not, a little bit short of expectations. I would say so. But it's still a slight increase year over year. Besides that, I just want to say that their margins are still not looking that good because of high interest rates. And you also have to look at the fact that despite that happening, the cost of sales ended up falling more than the revenue to push gross margins up to about 10.7%. So that happened despite the fact that operating expenses went up. There's a slight improvement there, but for the most part, things are not as great. So some losses here and there. But what was really good was the fact that NIO did give us a very, very big estimate, and they're saying that they should be delivering about 72 to 75,000 vehicles by the fourth quarter. So that's going to be a massive increase, averaging over 30,000 deliveries, over 25,000 deliveries, or very close to 25,000, excuse me, guys, for every single month. So that's going to be a big improvement. Now, the share price is still down because of the fact that their overall earnings weren't the strongest. The losses were worse than expected. However, they do have strong guidance for Q4, and hopefully we see an improvement in their margins. For the most part, there were more good and promising pieces of news coming out involving their products and its future. Like I said before, their margins and their overall revenue was not as strong. They also shared the details of their third brand, Firefly, and its first EV ahead of the full launch next month. That is something that's very important. I think that we're going to continue to see a lot more growth as a result of that. And they also have Firefly and Onvo, who are going to continue to help their overall growth increase. So I think that's going to be very bullish as well, at least for the longer term, especially as we approach next year. And they're planning on expanding to a lot more areas as a result of that. They also have Alps and Onvo, so they're talking a lot about their third sub brand. That's also going to see some very, very staggering growth, especially as you approach their big NIO Day event. So that's going to be very, very big news as they're once again adopting these new technologies. So I think that with the release of these new models and these new sub brands, it's very bullish. Their growth projections are very, very bullish. But what's not as good, like I said before, is we need to see those overall losses go down. Expenses are still high at these expansionary phases. But as time goes on, I do believe that they should improve, and we should see a better improvement in margins once we start to see a shift in interest rates. So interest rates coming down is what's going to benefit NIO as time goes on. We're still waiting for that to really pan out, so give it some time to develop. But other than that, I would say that earnings were, I would say, in the middle. Some things weren't that good, other things were pretty good. So far, it's just in the middle. We had 92 million in volume. We started off with a bit of a dip, only to get bought back up. And then also, when it comes to financials, we did see earnings once again showing some signs of improvement. Besides that, I didn't see anything else that's too crazy that's going on so far. We'll get some more analyst ratings later on. So as far as NIO stock goes, I think that we could attempt to try to break this 4.7 area. If that breaks, 4.95 is our next target. I think we're going to be range bound for the most part. We might see a little bit of a dip tomorrow morning, back down to the 4.5 area, then a bounce back up closer to 5. And I think that for the most part, NIO is just going to be trading sideways. It's not really doing too much. Besides that, I still see a lot of sideways price action. We might attempt to rebound closer to 5, though, as we're showing lots of signs we're trying to base around the mid 4s. So that is still a little bit more promising. As far as the market goes, we had a very mixed market. We did see tech sell off a bit. Finances were a little bit in the flat area. And for the most part, the market was just mixed. But overall, I just want to say the market did a decent job at the end of the day trying to get bought back up. We did see a little bit of repositioning, but then we had Nvidia's earnings. Nvidia is currently down a bit. Let me just double check if it's still down. It was flat and a little bit in the red during the after hours. It's only down 1%, which is like isn't that bad. Earnings were great, besides the fact that their guidance was good, but investors expected something even better. So very interesting stuff. Looking to the fourth quarter of the fiscal 2025, they're expecting to generate $37.5 billion in revenue, plus or minus 2%. Analysts were expecting 37.1 billion. So it's very, very close to expectations. When it comes to their growth, they beat on EPS and revenue. They earned about 81 cents per share on an adjusted basis. That's once again 94% up year over year. And then don't forget about the 35.08 billion in revenue, once again flying past expectations. They beat on expectations. They had nice margins that improved. There's a lot of talk about AI developments, which is leading to a lot more hype and excitement. They also talked about the fact that their guidance is not too bad, as they're seeing some nice growth. So good guidance. They also mentioned that Blackwell is exceeding supply for several quarters in the fiscal 2025, and they're not worried whatsoever. They are talking about how they're going to continue to push despite some supply constraints. So for the most part, good earnings, great growth overall. Guidance could have been like it was good guidance. It did beat expectations, but investors wanted to be even better, like way better than expectations, which is pretty wild. They expect big beats by Nvidia, not just slight ones. So that's the reason why the share price is just kind of flat. It wasn't really enough, but if anything, I think we did really, really well. For more data about the markets, tomorrow before market open, we have initial jobless claims. Then we have a bunch of bill auctions, so it's going to be very minor. There's nothing too crazy coming out. That's all I'm seeing for the time being. As far as the market goes, just know this. For NIO, going back to NIO, I anticipate that this might see some upside. As long as we don't lose 4.5, I think we might retest it and try to bounce off of it because we are showing some signs of a double bottom. And the 4 hours about to get a PPO crossover, and volume is coming back up. So what tends to happen is we dip a bit, then we start pushing back up to about that 4.95 area. So look for a test of 4.5 and see if we get a bounce, and then we'll see what happens after that. As far as other factors go, we have SPY. SPY is looking a little bit more bullish. We could attempt to push higher, especially since we have this gap up here to fill. As long as SPY does not lose 588 to 586.97, I think the chart favors more upside. I presume what's going to happen is we might tip a little bit, but then after Nvidia, Nvidia did not necessarily dump, it didn't crash. And for the most part, I would say earnings were more good than bad. And it's enough to help SPY continue to hold up. So I think there could be a small dip with Nvidia's earnings in the morning, just like how we saw a dip today. Hopefully not as bad as before. And because we held above 590, it's a very, very good sign. We might dip and then start bouncing. And I do anticipate we're going to be filling this gap. So I think most likely SPY does rally a lot more. ES could dip a little bit back down to 59.16 to 59.20, that range, before it tries to bounce and starts filling this gap up here towards 59.80. So I anticipate a bit of a bounce. Nvidia could retest 144. It's possible. Even maybe a little bit lower to 142. There's also this gap down here around 140, so there could be a little dip coming between 142 and 140, but then I expect a big bounce afterwards. I think Nvidia will be making its way back up to all-time highs. So look for a small dip to either 142, if not 140. That could cause a small dip in the markets, but then Nvidia could get bought back up afterwards because I don't think earnings were that bad. This is kind of like a seldom used event, so it's like, it wasn't really Nvidia's fault. Bitcoin might dip to 92,500 to 93,000 flat before it continues to push. I think 96,000 plus is coming very soon. Tesla, just like Nvidia, might see a small dip, might retest the 338 area or so, but then I do think that this does have potential to rerun. We're not ready yet. We might retest our 20 EMA at 335. So look for a potential dip on Tesla before it tries to bounce and break out to higher levels. For other factors out there, we have NQ, which is just range bound. We have 20,800 as our resistance, and then 20,550 is our support. We're going back and forth here, so we might kind of dip a bit before it continues to push up. So look for a retest of 20,650, maybe a little bit of a dip before this tries to break out for 20,800, but I still think we're range bound. For the QQQ, I think we look bullish. We're holding support very nicely. It's even flat during the after hours. Might see a small dip to about the lower 500s before it tries to balance, but I do think we will eventually push to fill the gap and make our way up to the 508. Aapl could dip to about 220 before it tries to bounce and break out. Looking at MSTR, this might dip a little bit thanks to Nvidia's earnings, back down to 461 near our 30 minutes 20 EMA before it tries to break out for that 500 target. Still looks more bullish. I think the Russell looks more bullish. This might push on its own for 232. Coinbase is doing a good job at holding up. Might retest 311 before it tries to bounce and break out for 327. Amazon might try to rebound as long as we don't lose this 200 area. I do anticipate that 203.7 and 204.5 could be coming. So there's a chance we see some more upside. As long as we don't lose 564, I think we are favoring 570. Could be a dip and a bounce up to 570 is the most likely possibility. Microsoft is trying to rebound. We have a wick forming here, so we could be pushing for the 417.8 to 420 area. And Google is also trying to form a wick here. We'll have to see if we can break past 177.67. If that breaks, we're looking for 178 and then eventually 180. So we'll have to see how things end up going. But I just think we have a nice accumulation here, nice inverse head and shoulders. We also have this support to watch for us. We're actually holding this trend line very, very well right over here. So this does favor that if there is some kind of dip, like we form another wick below here, we could get bought back up and continue to respect an uptrend and make our way higher for Google. As long as we don't lose 175, I think we favor upside. Google has potential as well. So with that being said, guys, I think the market favors upside. There might be a small dip coming thanks to Nvidia's earnings. It's just because Nvidia is getting a sell the news kind of reaction. That might happen, but then after that, I do expect more upside. So I don't think the market's done quite yet. Look for a dip tomorrow morning, and we'll see the market continue to push. I thank you all so much for listening. Please have a great day, and peace out.